All right, get going. Um, we will let people trickle in as they come in. So, for those of you on here who don't know Gary, I have the pleasure of working with Black Talon now for how many years is it now? It's at least two.
Yeah, a little over 2 years.
So, we work with Black Talon with all of our staffing companies and internal companies, basically to make sure we are protecting ourselves and all the people that we place all of our virtual staff at different projects. They have cybersecurity work done by Black Talon to make sure that our clients are also safe, in addition to us being safe. When we started our company, our biggest threat was exactly why we hired Black Talon. It was, how can we protect our own data? How can we protect our clients' data and feel like it is a safe recommendation to give a virtual assistant to a business that's maybe never worked with virtual assistants? How do we protect them in that placement process? That's why we hired Black Talon. So, Gary, you kind of mentioned something before we got on here today. In connection, obviously, with our virtual staff, but who is a threat out there? Like, why do we all stay up and wake up in the middle of the night over our data? Like, what are we scared of?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Ethan, for having me on. I appreciate that. Nice to meet everyone. Um, Look, most of these attacks are coming from states and countries like nation states and countries like China, Russia. Ukraine is also huge in the ransomware game. Prior to the wars, it was almost like split between Russia and Ukraine attacking us. It's kind of crazy right now. We're defending them. But these countries are, I'll do air quotes, kind of supportive of these ransomware events, especially countries like Russia. Because if you think about it, where does the money flow? Right? And in business, we always follow the money. So as billions of dollars leave the U.S. and funnel into countries like Russia, the Russian government's gonna basically say, yeah, all that money's getting spent in our country. Sounds good to me, right? And our law enforcement often is able to track these folks down, triangulate their position into these countries, but it's very difficult to extradite them, right? We can't call up the Kremlin and be like, oh, send Yugov over because we know he's, hacking businesses and caused $1 billion worth of damage. It doesn't quite work that way. So most ransomware does in fact come from Russia and Ukraine. Some starting to come from North Korea, China. So China's interesting. China is not typically in the ransomware game. They are heavy into email intrusions. They want to, basically get into as many email systems as possible, exfiltrate or steal that data, and then they leverage it for knowledge. Their other big game is theft of our intellectual property. That has been, their MO, their modus operandi for a long time. There's probably a reason why a lot of their, military hardware looks pretty close to ours. And the theft of information from researchers, from universities, from manufacturers, companies that are producing cutting edge technologies, right? That's what they want to do, and that's why they get into these networks. These organizations are highly organized. They're actually gangs, and most ransomware gangs have their own branding. They have their own color. They have a full business structure. They have kind of the equivalent of a CEO and a financial department and software development, right? They're developing highly sophisticated tools to break into networks. They're creating code to encrypt and steal your data. And they typically operate what's called a ransomware as a service. So it's basically the franchise and franchisee model. So, let's just say for argument's sake, Ethan, you and I are bad guys, right? And I'm, running this operation and I'm like, hey, Ethan, you're a bad guy too, right? You want in? And you're like, yeah, man, I want in. What's it going to cost? Well, yeah, dude, send me $10,000 in Bitcoin and I'll give you access to the most sophisticated tools in the world. But here's the deal. I get to keep 40% and you get to keep 60% of every ransomware event. You in? And Ethan's like, yeah, man, right? That sounds great. So now Ethan doesn't even have to be a really good hacker. He just has to be a known bad guy. And I'm going to give him these tools. These tools are designed to breach through firewalls, breach through computers, steal the data, encrypt the data. And it's basically an entire tool set. It sets up the crypto payment. It provides the keys to unlock the data, right? So he's basically walking away with a turnkey operation. So that's how most of these operations are working now, and it's highly effective. And then it also becomes difficult for law enforcement to take them down because they are not only structured and well organized, but they're also extremely distributed worldwide. The problem that we typically face with these ransomware gangs is going back to what I said before, is their code is extremely complex. We're not up against kids sitting in their basement in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who are trying to hack into your law firm, typically, right? We know for a fact very few cyber events originate inside the US, period, right? Because they know they're going to get caught. That's the reality of it. You can only hide so much from government agencies before you get caught inside of our borders. So almost everything is in fact outside. But one of the problems is we're up against these ransomware gangs. Some of them are generating $1 billion a year in revenue. So sit back and think for a second. What do you think they're doing with a lot of that money? Sure, the joke is they're going out buying their Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all the high priced items. But you know what? They can employ the most sophisticated coders in the world, right? If you're a bad guy and you want to make $1 million a year creating malicious code, there's a job for you, right? And these guys will pay you because they know that there's companies like us and their businesses like Ethan's that are setting up very formidable defenses. They still want in. That's the bottom line. So it is in fact a cat and mouse game. So one of the things that I always like to say and kind of to dispel the myth is these hackers, they don't care about the size of your law firm. They don't care if you're a small little, mom and pop shop with, 3 employees, or you're one of the largest firms in the country. They know that when they breach these networks, there's always a treasure trove of data, right? That's any type of professional organization, legal, accounting, financial, healthcare. They
Feel like
know.
sometimes in the past, sorry, were you finished? I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
that's
interrupt
good.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like sometimes in the past, I worked at a, local server law firm that thought, oh, I should keep my stuff on local servers because that's not on the cloud. The cloud's dangerous. I don't want to be there. And, the argument I would hear is, well, they're, employing the best engineers in the world to protect that data. You're just because you're small doesn't mean you're impenetrable. Just because you're on local servers doesn't mean you're safer.
Right. So I have basically said that I don't care what size organization you are, whether you have your own on-premise server, whether you're in the cloud, right? The risk is relatively the same. And understand this is so important in terms of understanding the cyber world. The hackers will adapt, right? As organizations of all types and sizes move to the cloud, do you think the hackers are like, I give up. It's in the cloud. It's better protected. No way. So you know what they do, Ethan? They attack the law firm and use the law firm's computer to access the cloud software. Period. I see it all the time when we do ransomware events, right? So besides protection, we do incident response cases where businesses of all types contact us either through law firms or through insurance carriers, or they're going to pay themselves. And they're like, hey, we're a victim. We need help. And we help these businesses recover. And we do full forensics investigation. So we literally know exactly how this attack occurred and the type of data that was accessed. And I'll tell you, it is now very common for firms, right, and professional businesses to have their network breached. And at 10 o'clock at night, the hacker uses Mary's computer, who's an attorney, that's been left on, to access her cloud data. And it's game over at that point because they have, her access rights.
Mhm.
So I'm not against the cloud. I built one of the very first cloud technologies back in the 90s. I am a proponent, but I think to your point, Ethan, like people are just offsetting risk by saying, hey, that's your problem now. All my data's up in the cloud. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. If you don't put the proper protections in place, they will get your system, right?
Yeah.
You talk to almost any person, in my role or someone who specializes this with the government, they'll all tell you the same thing. Everyone will get hit in some
Mhm.
capacity. Think about this. The number one problem right now is email intrusion.
Yep.
90% of people, probably even higher at this point, are using cloud-based email. So if you want to kind of dispel the myth right there, boom, there you go, right? It's hey, it's in the cloud and you're still getting into my account. It's kind of a mind shift change because as I alluded to, people were always like, get that server out of my office, get that out of my
Yep.
firm. Anyway, So I want everyone to understand it doesn't matter what size org you are, right? I've seen some really big firms do things very well. I've seen some very big firms. You walk in there, you're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like you have, 50 attorneys here and you don't have the most basic security in place. And then the flip side is you see some small firms like, wow, this firm's really doing a good job. There's always room for improvement. So that's why I always say it doesn't matter what size you are. Like you
Yeah, big,
and
small, it's not a factor
it
in
doesn't
protecting
matter.
yourself.
Yeah. Look, and sometimes the hackers deploy kind of a spray and pray methodology where they'll just scan the internet, hundreds of millions of IPs over a period of time. And their tools are looking for misconfigured devices, misconfigured firewalls, and they happen to hit your IP address on your firewall. Your firewall's not configured properly because your IT resources just made a mistake. And then they start picking away. They have no idea what's sitting behind that firewall. It's like, what's behind door number one? Let's get through the door and see, what prize is there. And when they get in and they know it's a law firm or professional organization, like, the bells go off because they know they've got a winner, versus, Dave's lawnmower shop where they're going to find out who bought lawnmower blades. Right. But I think this is something that everyone really needs to understand. They will get the data, period. I do these, lectures all over the country for lots of different verticals, and everyone, will come up, not everyone, people come up to me at the end and they're like, wow, I never thought about that. We moved to the cloud to not have this problem. And I was like, yeah, look, I get it. And the problem is the vendors, right? I mean, they produce this technology like, oh, you don't have to worry about security anymore, just move to the cloud. And that's not really fair, right? Maybe that flew 2 or 3 years ago, that it just doesn't fly now.
Yep.
And then I think the other part that we have to realize is that the good guys use really amazing tools. A lot of them are now leveraging AI. But what do you think the bad guys are using? Same thing, right? The same AI tools. So if you've looked at emails and how they've evolved, meaning malicious emails over the last year, maybe a little longer, what have we seen? We've gone from like broken English, improper use of our language, grammatical spelling errors to perfectly crafted emails, often better written than, for instance, the attorney that's actually sending it, right?
Yep.
Because AI just typically doesn't make spelling and grammatical mistakes. So the hackers don't need to know anything about your business. All they do is they go into ChatGPT or another AI large language model and say, write me a letter from person A to person B. Here's what I want you to describe. Here's my role, here's their role, and boom, you have the most perfectly crafted email. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's so obvious when I get a phishing email. I'm like, yeah, but it's not. Obviously, the human element of cyber is something we probably think about, but we don't realize the actual impact. And you nailed one of the most common scams, right? Wire fraud, payroll fraud, invoice fraud. These are all social engineering scams. And the threat actors, the bad guys, you know what they're doing? They're leveraging platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn and your own web page and some basic understandings of the industry. And then what they do is they create these lookalike domains, or they actually hack a real, person's email account that is in that supply chain. And they either impersonate them, or since they're in your real email account, that person receiving the email is like, oh, I'm smart. Let me make sure it's the real email address, is the real domain. And they're like, oh, this is really coming from Ethen. It's his account. It's not like, Ethen O125 @gmail.com, right? So they think they're outsmarting the bad guys. And then, basically what happens is through these, AI generated messages, or they create the sense of urgency, you get the idea. The receiver of the email may say, I'm good at detecting these things, but this really has to be coming from Ethen, so they do it. So we see a tremendous amount of wire fraud, for closings on real estate, um, for M&A. That's another one. We did a M&A transaction just under a year ago, where a private equity company bought a business for about $3 million. And the obviously the PE company had attorneys, the seller had attorneys. One of the business owners of the seller was also involved in the transaction. However, just before the wire went out, the private equity company received an email that appeared to come from the seller saying, hey, I just spoke to my accountant and he recommended I open up a separate bank account just for this wire transfer. So the private equity company was like, oh, okay, we'll just wire it to this bank account, sent the millions of dollars. And then the seller, like 4 days later, was like, hey guys, I never got my money. Where's the wire? It's been more than 24 hours. I get it. Sometimes they take 48 hours. So the PE company is like, look, here's the email you sent us. We confirmed with the bank the ABA number and the account number, and it's saying it was delivered. That's on you. Hacker interjected themselves in the email chain and walked away with the money. So this whole concept of kind of trust but verify, I think, is really important. Easily defeated with a phone call. And here's the more interesting part of that whole case: who's at fault, right? So now you got to figure out, you have 5 to 6 people on this email string. Was it inside counsel? Was it outside counsel? Was it the buyer? Was it the seller? Whose email system got compromised, and whose insurance carrier is paying? So for months it went back and forth until the carriers just basically, came to a settlement as to who would pay, because they couldn't quite prove, who was at fault. But I mean, things you don't think about, and during that, 2-month period, the buyer is still waiting. I'm sorry, the seller is still waiting for their money. So ugly transaction for sure. But these are the types of things that we have to be thinking about. So
Yeah, I mean,
beat
think about
social
it from the
engineering.
sake of a law firm. We're dealing with escrow of funds. We're dealing with, people whose livelihoods are on the line, and, someone who's, pretending to be, I don't know, Erie Insurance, sending us an email of certain sensitive information being requested. We can really damage not just our lives, our data, but our clients' lives. So we have to be, not just putting these practices in for ourselves and for protecting our businesses, but for protecting their livelihoods. So that's kind of why I took it to the next level for my own businesses.
Yeah, look, it's a huge problem. And we've done lots of ransomware cases against law firms where they had very confidential information accessed by the hackers. Then there's, the firms that get encrypted, all the data's unavailable, and they have court cases like that. What do they do? Like, all their records are digital, and it's an absolute train wreck, and the attorneys are just losing their minds. And I get it. Like, it's a really bad, position to be in. But I think a lot of people say to themselves, like, not me, I'll be fine, it's in the cloud, we're good. But it doesn't work that way. So social engineering, phishing, spear phishing. The other big one is vishing now, right? They're leveraging AI. We know it, right? They're leveraging AI. You talk to people who saw the Optimus, robots from Musk, right? And Tesla. Like, that's just, you watch that, and at first you got to be like, there's no way this is real, right? But then you realize, wow, we've really evolved, right? You watch those robots communicate with people on the street. I'm sure most of you have watched it. If you haven't, like, you need to look this up. It's impressive. It's super impressive. And even just the basic technology we have for AI, for AI avatars and making them talk. Like,
Mhm.
most of the time, like, we produce training videos using AI, and people are like,
We're
oh,
doing
when you
that
do
now internally as well.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's great. Feed a
it's
script. I don't
insane.
have to get on camera for everything anymore. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great, right? So, I think we all have to adapt. And one of the things that I always say in the cyber world, what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow, and or today even. So, and I think that's a huge challenge in the IT world, right? And we'll talk a little bit about this, but one of the big problems I see from a risk perspective is, the IT companies that are also trying to do cybersecurity. That's not their focus, right? They
Yep.
want to keep your firm up and running, and what are they focusing on? Making sure your servers work, your laptops, your workstations, you can print, right?
Yeah.
And security, whether or not they want to admit it, is an afterthought. So,
Yep. And I know that's not in your wheelhouse, but you guys do have the ability to at least help where you can and refer to the right person to maybe fix something like that. Is that a fair statement?
yeah, look, we tell almost everyone, you got to have a good IT vendor as well. It's
Yeah.
important because we don't come in, fix like your printing problem per se. So they need IT support, and then, like, you need someone to manage firewalls and things like that as well. So, but yeah, let's let's share this out here.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I think one of the big things we want to discuss is kind of IT versus cybersecurity. And if you look at the root cause, Ethan, for a lot of these attacks, you quickly understand, where the fault lies. And what I think a lot of firms believe is that my IT company has this covered, right? And that was kind of a good segue before. And they think that because A, they've either been told, or B, they've been using them for a long time and be like, these guys are great. They've done a great job with our firm, keeping us up and running and our technology up to date, things like that. But they just don't understand security, or they understand, like most MSPs and IT companies, basic security, right?
Mhm.
And one of the challenges we see is that the owners of the firm, the partners, et cetera, the associates, a COO, depending on the size of your law firm, doesn't always understand the security space, right? And that's not a ding. That's just who they are, right? They're good attorneys, or they're good operators, right? And this is kind of like thrown into their lap. Like, you got to now understand, IT and potentially security. So what typically happens here is the IT vendors like, oh, well, we just bought this new cyber tool. It's this new antivirus. We'll put a new firewall in. Like, you guys will be really well protected. And what I see in this space is an unbelievable amount of Kool-Aid drinking. Right. So they go to a trade show, and a vendor gets up on stage and like, hey, this tool will stop ransomware, right? And they kind of fail to say, well, no tool is 100% effective because it doesn't exist. Because if there was a 100% effective tool, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. It doesn't exist. And then they go back to the firms and they're like, hey, we just, invested in this new antivirus software, and it's going to prevent ransomware, right? And the partners, the associates, whoever's in charge of the IT is like, all right, sign us up for that. That's great. And then it's pitched up the chain again to the partners, right? And if you have a board, if you're big enough, and they say, yeah, look, we're good from a cyber perspective. We got this new tool, right? And that's where the failure starts, right? Because they don't actually understand the risk. Then they're selling the firm the tool. The firm's selling it internally as like, hey, this is the new whiz bang Kool-Aid drinking thing, and we're good. So what I've done is I've broken down kind of IT versus cybersecurity,
Yeah, and
and
just to be clear, Gary, for everybody on here, are you comfortable sharing these slides after? Just don't have to
sure,
take.
I can send these out.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
We'll make sure
Yeah.
that everybody on here gets them emailed, so you don't have to
Yeah.
take like insane notes during this. But go ahead.
Yeah. Everyone's screen capturing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was
So,
looking at myself and I was like, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense.
yeah, we can make this easy. We'll dump it as a PDF.
Awesome.
Yep. So here's kind of the swim lanes, from your IT company or managed service provider. Firewall. I'm shocked as to how many firms think they have a firewall, but they're working off their Comcast modem. So if you're a smaller firm, you may not actually have a firewall. And what happens here, and this is important, a statement will be made, well, your modem has firewall capabilities. It's very different, right? That's a modem that has some basic firewall capabilities versus a dedicated physical device, that is 100% firewall. So, typically you're going to hear names like Cisco, Fortinet, Sonic Wall. Like, these are all brand names of firewalls. You have to make sure you have an actual physical firewall. Patching, right? Your IT company, your managed service provider needs to be making sure your systems are patched. We're going to talk a little bit about some advanced patching capabilities in a minute. Backups. This is very, very important. Um, I will tell you that you really need to start going old school with backups. If you look at, say, even the Fortune 100, they have realized that anything that is online or connected is vulnerable. So, over the last 10 years, most businesses have moved to cloud backups. And what we're seeing now is the hackers obviously understand the importance of data. So they either get into your cloud backups, take your data, or sometimes they encrypt the data and lock it so you can't get to your backups. So I highly recommend for firms of all sizes that they have an offline backup, which
Do you have
basically
any like
means,
product recommendations that you think are like a good starting point, or do you think this is something that their IT provider should be doing?
yeah. So I always recommend they go back to their IT provider and say, hey, how do I store this data offline? Like, literally disconnected so I can throw this thing in our safe. I mean, in concept, depending on the size of the firm, you can get very high speed little portable hard drives, right? You have a couple of them, you rotate them every other day, and that device backs it up, and literally you disconnect the USB cable and you put it somewhere secure. Look, this isn't just for cyber, Ethan. Like, look what happened down in Florida. If you don't have a viable recovery process for your data, that makes a horrible situation even worse. What a lot of IT companies will say is like, "Oh, that's old school. No one does that anymore." But that's not true, actually, right? That was true a couple years ago, but a lot of big businesses are now moving to cold storage, which is the technical term for this. Like, hey,
Mhm.
we're going to put this on, backup devices, and those are literally going to go in a warehouse. And if we need the data, someone will physically pull it, or a robot will pull it and recover that data. So I do highly recommend that. The other problem with cloud technology is depending on the size of your data set, it could take a long time to restore the data from the cloud, depending on the speed of the servers on the cloud, the speed of your internet at your firm. So there's things to think about here. Um, Domain email. I do see quite a few attorneys, especially smaller firms, it'll say their first name, last name, and at gmail.com. They don't have a real domain name. So it should be your name at, abclawfirm.com. And you should also try to never, intermingle personal emails with, work emails, obviously for discovery reasons. You don't want that getting out there. They also handle networking. So if a network goes down, you have network problems. That's what the IT company does. I do really recommend password management tools. These are tools like LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane. These
Yeah.
tools, create unique usernames and passwords for every application you go to. And one of the ways hackers are accessing these systems is when they breach a website, they'll steal your username and password. They'll then take that username and password, they'll load it into what's called a credential stuffing tool. This is a tool that can take Ethan's username and password, and it reaches out to hundreds of websites and tries to insert that username and password into all those websites. And if Ethan reuses his username and password and he doesn't have multi-factor authentication in place, they're going to get in. Right. So use those tools. The other really nice thing, which I have a lot of law firms leveraging, is employee termination. So one of the things you can do with these password managers is if you have critical systems that you think someone can access from outside your firm, maybe from their home, what you can do is you can actually assign them a username and password to access that cloud technology, and they can't ever see the password. Right? LastPass or Dashlane will insert the password. They can't see it. They can't copy it. And then if they terminate or are terminated, right, or they quit, you can instantly go into LastPass and rescind their access to that, and
Yeah.
they can't get
We
into
we
the
learned that the
technology.
hard way about
Did
18
you?
months ago.
Yeah.
But that is we just got onto LastPass, and it has a nice Chrome extension so it can follow you around. It has an app for your phone. So if
Yep.
you're, leveraging like a case management app of yours you need to log into frequently, you need to check something, LastPass can kind of follow you around and you can easily get people out of it, like Gary's saying.
Yep. Absolutely. Um, a security risk assessment, right? This is what's provided by a cybersecurity company. So an SRA is a very powerful engagement between a third party cyber company and your firm. And what they're doing here is they're asking you, depending on the size of your firm and the scope of the assessment, let's just say for smaller firms, around 100 questions, right? And these questions are really designed to help the attorneys, anyone in operations, understand their cyber risk. So they're going to ask questions about, hey, are you encrypting data? Do you have remote access? Who has access to data? Where's the data stored? And all these questions are designed to help understand where you have potentially operational risk. Right? Are you doing things in your firm that are putting you at risk? And then the flip side is high five. You're doing a lot of things really well. Continue doing this. Right? These assessments are designed to not only emphasize some of your weaknesses, but also emphasize things that your organization is doing well from a security perspective. And a lot of times this helps ferret out processes and procedures that you may not even be aware of. It's not uncommon for a couple people from the firm to be on a call with one of our security engineers, and one of the attorneys are like, "We're doing what? I had no idea. What do you mean we're sharing data there?" And all of a sudden, that opens up a whole nother conversation, and you've just identified a significant security risk that can easily be closed by turning something off. Training. We started talking about phishing and spear phishing and social engineering. The number one way to defeat this is by training your attorneys and staff. right? They have to be cyber aware. It has to be an ongoing process. It needs to be documented and controlled. So what I always say is when you hire someone, right, part of their new employee training has to be cyber training, right? Because you could have 30 people in your firm doing everything right. That one new hire gets that email on day one because why? Oh, someone posted it on LinkedIn and the hackers tracked this stuff. Oh, Stacy at ABC Law Firm just got hired. Let's take a shot at this. Stacy.jones at abclawfirm.com. They hit send. They get a delivery into her inbox for a reject or a bounce, and they try and socially engineer her or get her to click on something because she's not cyber aware. Like this is really what's happening. So training is critical. Real-time vulnerability scanning. So we talked about the social engineering component of cyber attacks. Now we can talk about vulnerability exploitation. So if hackers aren't tricking you into giving up access to your network, what they're going to do is they're going to scan your firewalls and your devices, and they're going to look for a vulnerability. A vulnerability is a defect in a piece of hardware or a defect in a piece of software that allows hackers to gain access to your network. So, for instance, let's look at a firewall, Ethan, right? Firewalls are obviously a physical device typically, and they have software on them. And who codes the software? Well, coders, humans. And we know that coders make mistakes. So what hackers do is they go through that code and they try and find mistakes in that code. And when they find that mistake, they're like, okay, this could give me administrative access to the firewall, or this may actually bypass authentication completely and not even ask me for a password and lets me right into the firewall or the network. So then what they do is they create a hacking tool to point at that firewall. And then the firewall's like, oh, come on in. I don't need a password. You're good. And they get right onto the device. Or sometimes a human, like someone at an IT company, misconfigures the firewall. They open up a port, which is kind of like a door on the firewall to let traffic in and out. And a hacker scans your firewall and they're like, oh, check out this. This port's wide open. Give me 10 minutes, I'm in. Right. And what a vulnerability scanner does is it basically attacks that firewall very much the same way that a hacker would attack the firewall to find these vulnerabilities and these misconfigurations. And then it reports that data back to the law firm and their IT resources saying, hey, your firewall in Boston has, a misconfiguration on it and is leaving you exposed. Please close this door immediately. So that's at the firewall side. On the inside of the network, every single device on your network typically has software on it, whether it's a laptop server, workstation, tablet, smart TV, smart thermostat, right? They all run operating systems. Once again, operating systems are coded by humans. They make mistakes. So if a hacker lands on the inside of the network, they will run a vulnerability scan on all your devices without you knowing, right? And then they're going to find the vulnerable devices and then they deploy their hacking tools. And now they land on, Stacy, the attorney's laptop, and they're in her machine. And from there, they're going to launch the vulnerability scans. They're like, oh, check it out. Here's a pathway, to the server that's vulnerable. They launch a toolkit. And the next thing you know, in 10 minutes, they're sitting on your server with all of your firm's data, right? And then they start their exfiltration process. But typically, they move around the network through vulnerability exploitation. Think of it as them kind of like leapfrogging from computer to computer. So by running vulnerability scans on your computers every 4 hours, this is critical. If you're not scanning your computers every 4 hours, you're going to fail, period. So these vulnerability scanners will say, hey, Google Chrome is out of date and missing a vital security patch. Oh, this laptop is missing security patches from Microsoft going back to April of 2024. And you're like, what the heck? Like, why is my laptop, right, not being patched for security purposes? It's a huge vulnerability. And then you call your IT company like, no, that laptop updates automatically. Yeah, it's getting the security patches. And we're like, well, actually, it's not. Like the data's here. It doesn't lie. You're missing, 5 months worth of security patches. And then they're like, oh, wow, the setting was wrong on that laptop. Sorry. We'll install those security patches now. This is the power of vulnerability scanners, right? If you look at all of the Fortune 100 companies, right, and firms that have their security squared away, they're all running vulnerability scanners. If you go look up the FBI Cyber Division on LinkedIn, and on the 10th of October, the FBI put out an alert telling businesses that certain threat groups are heavily leveraging these vulnerability scanners to exploit networks, right? And as a countermeasure, what do you have to do? You have to leverage the same tools, right? You have to close the doors and windows on your network before the hackers find them and walk right through them. So scanning, firewalls daily is the standard operating procedure. Scanning your devices every 4 hours looking for vulnerabilities is now standard operating procedure. So if your firm is not engaged in vulnerability scanning, you have completely overlooked about 40 to 50% of your cyber risk. It's that clear cut. The next
Great.
yeah, thanks.
Appreciate
Uh,
it. So
go
like,
ahead.
is there like a layup piece of software or something that you think that is like could improve right now on that vulnerability scan piece, or is there like, more of a benefit to people to be working with somebody that can cover all of these bases?
Yeah, look, it really just depends on the size of your firm, right? We're engaged with some very large law firms and small ones too. And some of the law firms have the human intellect inside these organizations to run these vulnerability scanners and analyze the data. So, look, the two common tools are Qualys and Tenable. Those are kind of the BMW and Mercedes of vulnerability scanners. But what we find, unfortunately, is a lot of firms will run these scans, but then they have the data interpretation issue. There's so much data in these scans, right? You have a firm with hundreds of computers. There could be, 40, 50,000 findings on these scans. And then you know what typically happens with any type of compliance is when it's too much, it just sits in the drawer. No one looks at it, right? They can't process it. It's overwhelming. So typically what you want to do is in fact engage with a third party that can analyze all this data and say to the firm's internal or external IT, here you go, guys, here's what you need to do. Right. We've taken out all of the noise, go focus on this area of risk. And they go and work on it. Then you rerun the data points and say, hey, great, you knocked out 80% of what we handed you. This is what's missing. Take a second run at it. So yeah, look, and these tools can be extremely expensive. That's the other problem. So I find that most organizations, regardless of the vertical they're in, outsource this, because it's just
Mhm.
better data and it's actually typically more cost effective.
Yeah, and I know just taking a break here, I've done a pretty poor job of keeping everybody engaged.
Yep.
I know that we're throwing a lot, and this is kind of a scary topic that Gary's diving into. I saw Andrew had a, important point of thinking about these things as separate efforts in an org are over. Is there anything else? Maybe even just throw a one in the chat if you're still with us. Just trying to make sure that we got people getting some value out of this. Is there anything else? We'll take a couple minutes here, just pause. Are there any questions that have come up or any fears or anything that you guys are, starting to mull over, things you want to change in your organization? Anything that's coming up that maybe you have a question about, we'll pause. Appreciate it, Laura. And if there isn't, not the end of the world. Just wanted to give everybody an opportunity. All right, great. So it looks like people are still with us, maybe just soaking it in, not having a question at this point. So we'll pause a little later for questions. It looks like we're here for 90 total minutes, and we still have some time to dive in. So go ahead, Gary, pick up where you were.
Yeah, no problem. Another effective methodology for determining risk is what's called a penetration test, and I think a lot of people find this the most fascinating part of what we do. A penetration test is when ethical hackers, right, good guys that have very significant skills, will attack a client's network on purpose, right? So, for instance, Ethan, one of the things we do for you is we perform a penetration test, right? So we have a team of ethical hackers. They will assume the role of a cyber criminal, of a hacker. They will go after your network to see if they can breach it. And this is kind of the gold standard, right? And what happens here is if there are findings from this penetration test, then we sit down, with your team, explain the findings and the remediation steps in order to reduce that risk. So good cybersecurity firms, they don't just do kind of pass fail or slap on the wrist. They're like, hey, here's the problem, but let's work together and fix it, right? Because in the end, the tests are only as good as the remediation, right? What do you do after the data is presented to you to reduce your risk? So typically, you want to try and do this at least once a year. We're starting to see that organizations are starting to request this biannually now because unfortunately, data becomes stale pretty quickly in the cyber world. And new threats pop up literally every single day. Hundreds of new vulnerabilities sometimes appear on a daily or weekly basis. So the pen testing is something that every firm needs to engage in. There is an external penetration test, which is just the hacker's view of the firewall from the outside world, and then there's an internal pen test, which means if a hacker lands on the inside of the network, what kind of data can they access? What kind of damage can they do? So I think both are extremely valuable. External pen testing is not expensive. Internal starts to get a little more expensive because there's a lot of human work that has to get done there. So pen testing, right? If you're not doing pen testing, you should definitely kind of reevaluate what you're doing from a security perspective. And if your IT company hasn't recommended a pen test, you need to sit back and ask yourself why, right? Because IT companies don't specialize in pen testing. That's not their role. But if they're not sitting down with you and say, hey, look, there's a lot of cyber risk out there. You guys should have a pen test. If you haven't had that conversation, you need to rethink the strategy you have because that's a failure.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
IT isn't set and forget, you know?
yeah. Look, I say it all the time. No one wants you to look under the hood of the car, right? And unfortunately, a lot of good IT companies will say, "Hey, Ethan, I want the best for you. You should have a third party come and do, the cybersecurity and these pen testing." The IT companies that tell you they're doing a good job, but no otherwise, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, you don't need that. That's a waste of money." But look, if you have to defend against a lawsuit, and the plaintiff's attorneys, you guys know this better than I do, say, hey, when was the last time your firm had a pen test? And you're like, yeah, we haven't done that. Like, how are you going to defend that? You may be a multi-million-dollar firm and you haven't had a pen test done. It's not gonna go over very well when this is the standard, right, for security. The next is really interesting. It's called 24/7 managed detection and response. We do this for Ethan's companies. This leverages AI based antivirus, right? So there are various, I'll call them tiers of antivirus. There's kind of the tier 3, which has been around since computers existed, which, believe it or not, that technology is still used by a lot of firms, right? This is a dictionary based antivirus that has a dictionary of known threats. And if one of those items in the dictionary shows up on your network, the antivirus software is supposed to detect it, right? And then there's kind of the tier 2, which starts to use some AI and some dictionary definitions. And then there's the tier 1, right? So the tier 1 products in my mind are Sentinel-1 and CrowdStrike, right? Everyone's probably familiar with CrowdStrike because of what happened about 2 months ago, where they basically shut the world down, with a software update issue. And if you were traveling that day, it was not a good day to travel. But these are the top shelf for the tier 1 tools that every firm should be using. And they heavily leverage AI to detect malicious code, malicious payloads. And they do what is called behavior analysis, which is really fascinating. So the AI actually starts to learn, what you do on your network, how you use your network, what types of tools you're using. And it also knows the behaviors of hackers. And if it sees something happening on the network that is the fingerprint of a hacker moving around your network or attempting to launch something malicious, the AI will instantly launch a counterattack, right? It'll destroy the code. It'll do what's called network isolation. Ethan is very familiar with this, right? Where it actually shuts the network card off on a computer because the AI is like, whoa, I don't like what's going on in this computer. Like, this is not normal behavior for Mary Smith. And it will sever the network connection, basically taking her off the network. And then it
Yeah.
notifies, our security engineers and says, hey, we've taken, laptop 56 offline, and here's the reason why. And then the security engineers will call up Mary and be like, hey, were you copying files from Ethan's computer? And she's like, listen, I'm not even in the office. We're like, all right, we got a problem, right? Or she'll say, look, yeah, Ethan asked me to move some files around, so we're good. All right, we'll reach out to Ethan. Hey, is that proper, procedure for you? And he's like, yeah, I asked her to do that. We're like, all right, look, the AI did its job, but it's false positive, no problem. We'll release her machine and she can get back on the network. but that's a win, right? So the problem that I see, Ethan, is a lot of IT companies deploy this AI technology, and one, they don't know how to configure it properly. And we know with any type of technology, right, or anything, if you don't know how to use it, you don't know how to leverage it to its maximum capability, it's going to fail. You watch these videos of people, with $200,000 sports cars get on the road, they slam on the gas, and next thing you see them crashing into a light post because they don't know how to drive the car, right? And it's very common in the IT world where the same thing happens. I'll give you a case study here, and this was actually in the healthcare space. We did a breach on a relatively large pediatric group, and this pediatric group had a systemic ransomware event, and they were using one of these tier one tools. And we got in there and we're like, oh my God, how did the hackers get around this tool? And after about 24 hours, we quickly realized that the IT company did not configure the tool properly. And because it wasn't configured properly, it was shutting computers down on the network, impacting patient care. So, you know what the response from the IT company was? They dialed the technology back. They turned the dial back so it wasn't as effective and it didn't autonomously respond. It required a human to do something. So, guess when the hackers attacked them? Saturday morning at 3 a.m. There was no one watching the network. So Monday morning, they walk in and they have hundreds of computers fully encrypted, hundreds of thousands of patient records compromised because of, this lack of 24/7 and proper configuration. This is a systemic problem, period.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, like if you look at your full year salary you're going to be paying to an employee, accepting that maybe 1% of downtime to protect your network and protect your clients is inevitable that maybe didn't exist in the past, where maybe we have these over-inclusive false positive triggering events where maybe somebody's down for 4 hours, but your business isn't compromised.
Exactly. Right. And that is the core issue right there, Ethan. I think you nailed it, right? And we understand this too. Security is always a balance, right? If we dial up security so much and your firm can't function, that's not effective. If we flip the dial the other way and hackers get in and you get it compromised, well, that doesn't work. Right. So it is a balancing act. It's understanding the technology that you have within your firm. It's understanding the protective measures that can be implemented to prevent these types of events and creating a happy, balance between the two. So I think that is something that is a struggle in many cases. Um, okay, so someone just posted, I love a list of questions, I need to be asking and boxes that need to be checked. All right, so we can work on that, and we may actually have some time at the end to address that question. I think that's a great question. All right, daily external scans, Ethan, we already covered here. So in terms of this list, I would say this is really where you want to be. These SRAs, the training, the AI-based vulnerability, the AI-based antivirus. One thing I forgot to mention, I can't talk, is the vulnerability scanning. So another very powerful piece of technology that has now been out for a couple of years is vulnerability scanning with autonomous remediation, right? So most vulnerability scanners that IT companies use, they'll just identify all the unlocked doors and windows. Like, hey, here are the 3,000 problems with your network. Go do something about it. But the tools that cyber companies are now using will identify those 3,000 problems, but they'll say, listen, I found 3,000 problems. And you know what? We patched 2,600 of them automatically. We've just reduced your risk, substantially 80%. So, if you're not aligning yourself with a company that can identify the vulnerabilities and has a platform that automatically fixes it, you're making a mistake. Because if you look at the trend in hacking, it used to be that hackers would take like 30 to 60 days to build an exploit kit, a hacking tool to exploit a vulnerability. Fast forward to today, like right now, October 2024, hackers are now building these exploit kits in sub 7 days, right? So if you scan and turn that data over to your IT company, take some 30 days to fix the vulnerabilities, you've basically left yourself exposed, your firm exposed for 3 weeks. So the game is vulnerability scanning, with autonomous remediation. That's where you need to be playing. And if you're not, you're going to have a cyber event, period. Because we know in almost every ransomware case and intrusion, hackers have exploited vulnerabilities, right? They find that unlocked door or that, front door of the firm with a Home Depot lock on, and they kind of just kick it and the door flies open because it wasn't properly configured. So I think these are the tool sets, and this may actually be, helpful for what was her name?
Yeah, and something that's
Yeah,
simple that kind of
Laura asked.
what got me to contact you guys from the very beginning. Well, first off, I believe about a week after we engaged Black Talon, my firm actually was hit with a malware attack on our email servers and our website, and
Right.
our email was down for 10 days. And you guys did help us navigate it and protect ourselves for the future. But what I said going through, with giving you guys some background here, if you can't have access to your email, you can't run marketing because you can't trust that you're going to be contacting your clients the right way. Your clients can't get responses. It's an abyss when you go into that scenario. I said, never again am I going to be reactive with this stuff. I'm going to be proactive to prevent this from ever happening again because there is no target that's too small. And being in the spot where our website was down and we live on marketing, generating hundreds, if not thousands of leads a month, that could have cost us, that one event could have cost us $1 million in revenue over the lifetime of our business. So we said we cannot ever have this happen again. How do we get proactive, not reactive? So, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, right? And what I tell a lot of attorneys is a ransomware attack will change your life. And it sounds dramatic, but it really isn't. You can't operate for 2 weeks. Your data is now potentially compromised. You have potential client issues from a regulatory compliance and then a reputational perspective. Imagine having deals that are now public that shouldn't be public. Like all these things, you really have to process and say what if someone broke into my email? What would be the impact to my firm if someone got onto my network and gained access to all the data? Because you know what? They almost always do. 90% of ransomware events result in a partial or complete theft of the firm's data. So I always say do a gut check, and if you can check off the box and be like, I don't care, then okay, that's on you, right? What if they got into my cloud technology? What would the impact be? And balance all of that, right? And as a decision maker, as the owner of the firm, whatever your role is, you get to make those decisions. As long as you have all the correct information to make that decision, then people have different risk tolerances. We deal with people like, dude, I don't care. I got insurance for this crap. And others are like, no way. Like that happened to my buddy who's an attorney, and his life was miserable. I don't want ever this, I don't ever want this to happen to me. So, but you got to be proactive, period.
So, a couple things. I saw you had at least one more slide, so I didn't want to take you away from that if you wanted to share at some point. But, a couple of things that, are obviously selfishly relevant to my business and to a lot of people on here. I know we have some of our clients on here right now. Outsourcing. Some firms do it correctly, others have no visibility into security. So, let's take random staffing company placing people based out of the Philippines into a law firm who wouldn't engage someone like you. What should be going through, people's head when they're, evaluating from a pure security standpoint, different vendors for services like this?
Yeah. So great question. The challenge here is a lot of companies, outsourcing companies, for instance, make statements. They're like, "Oh, we're fully compliant, whatever regulatory vertical they're in, financial, healthcare, etc." And people who sign up for their services like, "Oh, that's great, sign me up." Right? Or they stamp some type of logo on their website that is literally made up and the marketing team created it that has no real bearing. So third party risk is one of the biggest problems in the cyber world right now. You sign up for cloud technology, you sign up for services like Ethan's, et cetera, and you don't do an investigation to understand what they're actually doing from a security perspective. And typically you're just going by what they say. So a lot of the things that we just discussed must be in place by must be in place by a company like Ethan's, right? You have to have a third party cyber company in there that's truly evaluating and addressing risk. Um, you need to ask them and say, hey, can you give me an executive summary of what you do from a security perspective? You don't have to tell me what's wrong with your network, but I want to know what you're actually doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis to protect your environment. And you know what? Companies that are providing services to your firm should be happy to provide that document. They're like, oh yeah, no problem.
Their
A
market
letter.
advantage for them.
For sure. For sure. Right. Here's what we do. Right. Here's a letter from our cyber company, validating everything that I just told you. And you know what? A lot of times, if you want to dig deeper, then you're like, hey, can we do an NDA here? My IT team really wants to understand a couple more things about, what you guys are doing. Do you have some trending data? Can you show us, how, your risk has either increased or decreased over the last 12 months? And you know what? I'm not against that. I think if you want to have, an open conversation with a potential client, or on the flip side, you want to engage in a company that has access to your information, they should be, wanting to provide, this type of data. Obviously, nothing that's so confidential that could hurt them, but enough that you can say, all right, these guys truly understand security. They're, checking the correct boxes. And not only are they checking it, but they're validating what they're doing, right? You can say, well, I did a pen test, so we're good. So as the law firm, you should be asking that company, okay, you did a pen test. Was everything resolved? How long did it take you to address those issues that were detected? And, being an attorney, you can ask one little question and that will literally open up a whole bunch of rabbit holes for you to go down. And, you're going to know right away whether this organization is doing the right thing. So I really recommend that you always do third-party due diligence on any piece of software or any firm you engage with that has access to your data. And if you don't do that, you can actually be setting yourselves up for future liability.
Yeah, and to go even further, we've had some clients that, they believed us, but, we even had people from Black Talon hop on with them to talk through and verify, that what we are doing is, industry leading strategies to prevent harm to their business. So, their Black Talon members have been nice enough to hop on with those extra concerned clients and reassure that we are doing what we need to be doing to protect them and their data through our people that we place on their projects.
Right.
So, let's start getting into practical solutions. We have a couple people that, we're hitting about an hour here, so maybe we make this maybe 15 more minutes. So let's give everybody
Sure.
some practical solutions that today they could go implement into their businesses and tomorrow be in a safer place.
Great question. So let's talk about certain things that literally cost you $0, right? Because people like free stuff. Um, Bank accounts, credit card accounts, right? Financials, always turn on multi-factor authentication, period. We've seen these accounts accessed time and time again and costing businesses hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because, and I hate to say this, they were lazy. They didn't want to turn on MFA. They didn't want to have to get that 6-digit code on their cell phone, which I know is such a pain in the neck. And you know what? Their username and password got harvested because they fell victim to a phishing attack or spear phishing attack, and the hackers got into their bank accounts and wired out money. So if you have any type of system that supports MFA, by default, always turn that on. Also think from a liability perspective, you have these insurance policies for cyber. Well, not a lot. I will say every one of them will ask you if you're using MFA and someone in your firm has checked off yes. Now you file a claim because you're the victim of a cyber attack and it's determined that MFA was not in fact used. Are they going to pay? You gotta, and they will dig into this. I've done many cases where they're like, well, why didn't you guys have MFA turned on? And now it becomes a battle. So turn on MFA. Never ever use email that doesn't support MFA. I think most people know numerous people that have had their emails compromised because we get them. We're like, hey, don't respond to any email that came from my email account because my account got hacked or my Facebook got hacked or whatever. So MFA often stops that. Here's another one. When you log into your bank account and it says, would you like to trust this computer for 30 days? Never say yes. And you're like, but it's my computer. Why would I not trust my computer? Let me give you an example. What happens when you log into your Amazon account? for the first time on a new computer. It's going to initiate the MFA, right? It's going to pop up an app on your computer, excuse me, on your cell phone, or it's going to pop up a text message, and you're going to have to punch that code in. Then what Amazon does is it drops a cookie or a token on your machine. It's like, I trust Ethan's computer. So the next time you open your browser and you go to Amazon, Ethan, does it ask you for your password?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? It doesn't, because it trusts your computer. So now I'm a threat actor and I've landed on Ethan's computer. I open up his browser, I type amazon.com or chasebank.com or whatever. If that computer has been trusted, it may not initiate the MFA. And it may not even prompt you for your username and password. Now, banks typically do not do this. I've not seen this with a bank. But here's the next problem. What if you've saved your username and password into Google Chrome? The hacker opens up your browser. They'll look at your browsing history, be like, oh, look at this bank, Bank of America. They click Bank of America, right? Because they have the screen sharing app on your computer. So they're literally sitting on your computer. Bank of America loads, Google Chrome inserts the username and password. They hit OK. The computer's trusted, no MFA, they're in your bank account. And I've seen this over and over again. So MFA, and also don't trust the computers. I also don't love the idea of MFA codes being sent to your email, because going back to what I just said, if a hacker lands on your machine and then they type in Gmail, or they open up Microsoft Outlook and it doesn't prompt you for a username, where is your MFA code going? It's going to your email that the hacker has access to. So always use something
Is text better as a preference if that's possible?
Yeah, for sure. So I recommend, number one, the authenticator apps, right? Google has an authenticator. There's numerous authenticator.
Yeah.
What's that?
There's a Microsoft one too.
Microsoft, yeah, right. So that's on, right? That's on your physical device, right? So, on your phone. So you want to make sure that you're authenticating to those devices versus the local machine.
Yeah, especially in your case management systems, guys. Pretty much every cloud case management has multi-factor. I know that it was a pain to get onto our Salesforce one and roll it out, but now Salesforce makes it mandatory that you have to have multi-factor.
That's right.
With all of your clients' data on the line, I would put in a protocol today that you have multi-factor on your case management, especially, and start there because, that is the most sensitive data that people want to get into. And then, maybe is there something that would be a close second, Gary? Would that be email?
For sure. I do see tremendous number of email intrusion, so you want to protect that, and also understand when someone gets into your email account, who can they also attack? Your clients. So now your client gets an email from your real email account prompting them to click on something, download something, enter something like username and password. Hey, we've got an update in our case management software. We want you to access it. Please enter your Microsoft credentials. And now the hacker's got your client's Microsoft credentials. Very common, right? So we want to make sure that you're protecting email. Those are two big wins. Make sure you're always running the updates. Right, you see Google Chrome has an update available. That little box in the top right-hand corner for Google Chrome, it's telling you there's an update available. Why does Google come out with updates most of the time? To fix security problems. Period. That's it. So whenever you see that update, as soon as you can, click that button, let Google relaunch and install the update. Google's pretty good now at reopening all the windows you had open. A lot of people have 500 windows open and like, oh my God, if I shut down Chrome, it's going to be a nightmare. I get it, but it's pretty good at bringing back what you had on the screen. So you should always run those updates. You always want to make sure your computer is set to run the Microsoft updates. Windows 11 is pretty good at forcing those nowadays, but Windows 10 sometimes gave you options. But once again, you don't know what you don't know, and that's the power of these vulnerability scanners.
My Chrome right now, so.
And then you're gonna drop off this call, right? We're like, what happened to Ethan? He was updating his computer, So, but keeping your computer up to date. Adobe, you guys work with a ton of documents, PDF files. You got to keep those up to date. Adobe is notorious for having security problems, and hackers are injecting links into Adobe PDF files, and you click on the link and you're redirected to a malicious website. Cyber training, seek out a cybersecurity company or us, that can provide cyber training for you and your team. I think that's really, really important. That's an easy win, low cost, big win there as well. make sure you're not using antiquated operating systems, antiquated technology. The hackers will often exploit that. So I think, from a basic um, cyber perspective, those are some of the things you want to do. Security risk assessments are not really expensive. Those are another, high value, big win engagement. So
So, just we're now at 10:10. I know we said we were going to go to 10:30, but I've seen a couple people drop off. I know it's tough to start a day for 90 minutes on a webinar. What I think we should do is let's kind of give everybody some action items. We gave a few tips that would immediately secure your business a little bit better. Just one very small thing. This is not on your list of things
mhm.
that we're expected to ask. This is just something that kind of is coming to mind right now. I know that there's, a mixed bag of IT companies out there. Do you think that the IT company someone works with needs to be a local company like that they can touch and feel, or
Right.
could it not? Could it be a remote company that's out there?
Yeah, I don't actually believe that they need to be local. I think most good IT companies, well, let's backtrack. Any IT company, whether they're a mile down the road from you, or 1,000 miles, when they need to fix something that's not a physical fix, they're just going to remote in, right? A guy's
Mhm.
not going to get out of his or her help desk chair and drive a mile down the road to install an update. Just doesn't work that way. So I think the best IT companies have a really strong team of engineers that remote in and fix this stuff. And when stuff physically breaks, what most IT companies do is they contract with companies that have what are called remote hands. Right? These are just subcontractors that all they do is they work for a bunch of different IT companies and they go out and they replace a power supply or a motherboard or fix a printer. And I would rather work with an IT company that is really solid and is remote than a local IT company that just isn't a good
So
company.
let's say someone on here did want to engage with you guys for sort of the cyber lane. Do you think you have some good ones that could help anyone in any part of the country that you would recommend?
Sure. Yeah, we work with about 250 different IT companies across the U.S. and we have a significant footprint. So we do security for about 50,000 computers worldwide. So we'll have contacts for them for sure.
That's awesome. I think that would be helpful for people, including us who are, kind of in the market for something new on that lane. So
Sure.
awesome. So, maybe I think you had a slide with a QR code on it. Was that intentional?
I did. Yeah, I pulled that down because we started talking again. I can throw that back up.
Yeah, why don't we share that for a little bit? We are 15 minutes before time, so I think what may make sense, I see a couple questions that came through. It looks like Laura was asking or talking about a little bit of a war story about somebody that they know local whose hospital was hacked. These are real problems that can cause dramatic impact on people. So, I'm going to leave this QR code here so you have access to Gary's contact information. And I'm going to also put our websites. I'm not 100% sure everybody on here is a lawyer. Hang on one sec to everyone. So basically I own two staffing companies. One is primarily for the legal lane where we've placed fully trained cyber secure virtual staff on law firms. That is through the attorney assistant lane. If you are not a law firm owner, we have turnkey ops here. I'm going to leave both our websites there if you did want to book some time with our team to talk about our virtual staffing offer. We place full-time staff in roles that people typically hate in businesses, the back end stuff, the retrieval tasks, the intake, the overnight type work. That is where we specialize. Attorney assistant is just for law firms. Turnkey ops is for non-law firms. If you would like to reach out to us, we'd be happy to connect you with Gary's team as well. So Gary is screen sharing right now his contact info. If you'd like to book time with Black Talon, I highly suggest it. This is what helped us sleep at night when we have, 600 plus people working at businesses. This is what allows us to trust our security there. So Gary, I see a couple questions that came in. One was what tools do you suggest to consider for cybersecurity when working with virtual assistants around the world?
So let me ask this question. Is this question directed to an organization that hires a virtual assistant. So what tools
Good
are in that?
question. I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure. I'll let
So
you take it how you want.
yeah. Unless Natalia, you want to respond. There's also another good question which I can jump to. Natalia, if you're still on, can you just clarify, like if you're hiring a virtual assistant, what tools you need to have on your network, or are you asking what that virtual assistant should have on their computer? So if we can just clarify that. And the answer is probably actually going to be about the same, to be honest. And then I think Andy Taylor here pointed something out really important that I think everyone should know. If a hacker gains access to your email account and you have file shares in there that you store, larger documents or records or images or videos in, and they gain access to that, not only do they have access to your email, but they may have access to a lot of files, right? And also they can potentially start encrypting and stealing those files as well. So it's not just like, oh, they're going to read all my emails, which is bad. They could have access to a lot of really confidential information in those file shares. All right, let's see here. Okay, I don't think she answered, but all right, I'll just answer generally then. Um, if you're engaging with a company that provides virtual assistants like Ethen, he is doing what needs to be done, right? He has the AI without going into the specifics here for confidentiality reasons, but he's doing vulnerability scanning and pen testing and leveraging 24/7, monitoring of the environment and assessments and training, right? As all part of his security posture. And when he onboards new employees, they have to go through training. So those are all, the core elements of security that addresses cyber risk. For a business that's engaging, like you have to do the right thing for your organization too, because it could be a direct attack against your organization through hacking, social engineering. It could be another third party that gets hit and they use those computers to attack yours. It's even your IT company, right? And your managed service provider. I talk to so many businesses and they're asking, oh, what do you guys do for security? And I'll ask a very simple question. What does your IT company do for security? And they're like, I don't know. I trust them. I'm like, that's not the right answer, right? You can't say, I want to do third party analysis on all these companies, but you're not doing it on the highest risk group of individuals, which is your IT company. They have access to everything. So I think when you look at security, you have to apply the same standards across the board. You can't pick and choose who you're going to apply, these tests to, and this validation. So yeah, and whether it's your case management software, your IT company, backups, email system, like you need to do third party due diligence, and the same applies to all of those that apply to your organization. So hopefully that made sense.
That's great. So I think, Gary, looks like we had a bunch of people drop off at this point. I think it's
Okay.
time to wrap it up. If you guys do want to get in contact with Gary, feel free to scan this. I'm sure he would be able to facilitate whatever you are looking for, either on the referral for IT or cybersecurity side. We engage them. We only refer people to businesses that we are actually using. It's something that I feel very passionate about. And knock on wood, we have not had, something that penetrated one of our clients' accounts or our internal accounts after working with these guys, but never say never. We want to keep thinking about, how do we keep protecting ourselves proactively for tomorrow? So, Gary, thanks for taking the time today. I really
Sure.
appreciate it. And, is there any last things that you wanted to fill in our crowd with?
Do something. I tell everyone, you can't walk away from these presentations and pretend like everything's good and go back to normal, especially knowing what you know now, right? You've been empowered to make good decisions for your firms and businesses. Take a proactive approach, like Ethen said. Like that's the win.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Gary. Thank you so much.
You got it. It's a pleasure as always.
All right.